and welcome to Business Connections, a program of the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce. I'm Holly Allen, Director of Marketing and Communications for the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce. And today we are talking about the Ohio state budget, which was signed by Governor John Kasich at the end of June. Joining me today, my guest, is my colleague, Stephanie Precht. She's the Director of Public Policy at the Chamber. Welcome.
Thanks
for being with me today.
My pleasure, absolutely.
Well, we thought we'd have a much more exciting topic today. Yeah. There were some parts of this budget that were a little controversial.
Right.
But it looks like they weren't in the final document. Can you talk about some of those? Especially, I think there were some proposals that sent you and the rest of the advocacy team at the Chamber into motion first.
Right. So the interesting thing about the budget process is we always see the governor's budget first. It rolls out usually at the end of January. And so we flagged a few provisions early on this year, most of them dealing with tax reform. And so the governor had proposed a couple of things that we said, this could be really impactful for the business community and not in a good way. And some of those provisions were dealing with a sales tax increase, an oil and gas severance tax increase, tobacco, taxes on tobacco and wine, beer and wine products, and then an expansion of a sales tax that would hit some of those service sectors that hadn't previously dealt with that. And so we flagged those, we watch them. You know, we know the process always changes after the governor introduces his budget, then the House and Senate take it up. So we just really early on said we need to watch this and we need to make sure that we're communicating with our legislators, because all told, the governor's proposal had initially meant about $1.2 billion of economic or of impact on the business community as it relates to a tax increase. So it was really kind of about tax shifting rather than tax reform. And we said, we obviously believe in tax reform. We're the business community. There's a lot of things that we'd like to fix in our current tax code, but this wasn't the way to do it.
Absolutely. And so that process, as you know, was usually pretty long.
Right.
And just as a reminder, we talk about it a lot on this show, but the Chamber has 3 lobbyists on staff. So you're one of them, and you keep an eye on these proposals that come up within the legislature. Right. So you talk about those proposals that were controversial, not in the final document. How does that process work? What happened to them?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So after the governor, rolls his budget out, then the legislature takes it up, the House and Senate. And so, we worked closely with them, not only ourselves at the Dayton Chamber, but chambers from across the state and other business advocacy groups. And, they fine-tune what they want to see, and sometimes it looks drastically different than what the governor proposed. And so we were happy to see that the version that the House and Senate passed did not include those tax reforms, so they were taken out altogether. So, but the other side of it, the flip side of it, meant that those tax increases weren't there, so that meant that they still had to tackle some pretty significant budget deficit.
Right.
I think about $800 million in spending that the House and Senate ended up having to cut from other places. And so, we have to move forward with a balanced budget in Ohio, and that meant, a lot of give and take over basically the 3 or 4 months during the spring session. We did end up, however, with a couple of provisions that we were really supportive of. Those 2 provisions, one of them dealing with municipal tax reform, which is something that the Dayton Chamber has been a big advocate on for the last several years. It really was dealing with kind of streamlining the process. Currently, businesses that do have business in multiple municipalities across the state, this new provision would allow them just to file one tax return with the state rather than filing in each municipality.
That makes it a lot easier.
Totally streamlined, yeah. And it's a choice for them to be able to do that, but the ability now to have it all kind of funnel through the state I think cuts a lot of red tape for them.
Which is something we talk a lot about at the Chamber.
Right, exactly. How do we make it easier for them to do business? And then the second change was was really an elimination of something called the throwback rule. And so this was about reducing the tax burden for businesses who have customers that are not located within their municipality or even within the state of Ohio. So if you think about the current environment where we have a lot of businesses who do online sales.
Right.
And so their clients are all over the state and country. And so this really dealt with how do we reduce the tax burden for that specific group of businesses.
Interesting. As business changes, I guess so do our
Exactly, our tax laws.
Our tax laws, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about one thing that caught our eye at the Chamber? It was a group of earmarked funds that could be headed to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Can you tell me a little bit about what that's about?
Sure,
Just an
yeah,
overview.
absolutely. I think that this budget was some great news for Wright-Pat. The legislature set aside about $11.3 million for sort of defense-related activities. A big chunk of that was to go to support this federal research network, and that is kind of funneled through a lot of our colleges and universities.
Okay.
The idea is we have Wright-Pat as a federal installation that just attracts a lot of federal funding and research and development dollars. And how do we leverage those partnerships with our local universities and colleges to really take advantage of the R&D that's happening on base? And I think we need to have kind of the legislature understands we need to have a more concerted, more organized effort around that. So there was some funding set aside for that. There was also a big chunk of funding that was set aside for the Air Force Institute of Technology, and so that's a really unique asset at Wright-Pat. It's used nationally. People come from all over the country to attend this institute, but this money was really designed to allow the institute to partner better with institutions from across the state. So it's not so inward-looking; it's outward-looking. And how do we use this asset to benefit more than just this sort of small region? So that's another piece of it. And then specifically we were really, really happy to see some infrastructure dollars, about $500,000 that went to Wright-Pat. This is like brick and mortar money that's going to improve.
They have a lot of it there to
They
keep
have a
up.
lot of it there. It's a huge installation, a big base, and so the state recognized that some money needed to be spent to improve the conditions there.
That's great news. We've heard people from the base talk about the need for dollars for infrastructure there.
Right.
Especially that last one. I'm wondering, we've heard a lot recently about the possibility of a new base realignment and closure, or BRAC process.
Right.
Do those dollars, you think, have anything to do with the possibility that another BRAC process could be coming up? I know, it's really important that we align Wright-Pat and set them up to be in a good place if we enter that process.
Absolutely, yeah, that you're exactly right. When we went through the initial BRAC in 2005, see, I guess with BRAC, there's always winners and losers, and we didn't know going into that process in 2005 how Dayton would come out, but there's a real strategy that our community undertook to position ourselves as strongly as we could to attract some of those missions from across the country. The Defense Department and the folks in Washington realized that there's some places where they need to cut and there's some places where they need to expand. And so in 2005, Dayton was a winner, Wright-Pat was a winner, and we ended up with about 1,200 new jobs and new missions that came to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And, not knowing what's going to happen in DC over the next several years, but knowing that there's probably going to be another round of BRAC, the state really is stepping up and saying, this doesn't need to just be a Dayton issue or a Dayton region issue. This needs to be a statewide focus on how do we position Wright-Pat to benefit from this next round. You're talking about $11.3 billion of economic impact for Ohio, and then about $4 billion just for Dayton alone. So
it's huge.
Yeah, Wright-Pat everybody knows Wright-Pat is the big game in town, and even just that piece of money, $500,000, demonstrates, I think, from the state that we're kind of all in this together. Like this is important that we're all on board.
I think it's really smart that we start looking ahead and planning for, if that would happen, position ourselves so that we're not being reactionary should that come up.
Yep.
We talked about some of those controversial proposals that were removed, but Governor Kasich did get a chance to get out his veto pen with this budget. One issue in particular, that was a freeze on new Medicaid enrollees. That doesn't seem like a move you typically see from a Republican governor. Can you talk about what that proposal was that he vetoed?
Yeah, absolutely. Governor Kasich has really championed Medicaid expansion pretty much since the beginning, Medicaid expansion for Ohioans. I think it was 2013 when President Obama decided that we would attempt to expand Medicaid to a new bracket of people and tied federal funding to it. And Governor Kasich said, well, if there's federal funding attached and it kind of lowers the risk and responsibility for states to step up and provide that funding, then let's let's get on board. And since then, I think he's become even a stronger advocate around Medicaid expansion. So what happened was, when this issue emerged again, or in the most recent state budget, is really based on what's happening in Washington, and the idea that we all know, even today, the Affordable Care Act is being discussed and debated both by the administration and by the legislature.
Right.
And not knowing what Congress is going to do, there were a lot of particularly Republican lawmakers in Ohio who said, let's put a freeze on it. Let's wait and see whether this funding is going to continue from the feds or if this funding is going to dry up, and wanted to put that freeze in place. Understanding that impacts direct care for, hundreds of thousands of Ohioans,
right.
Governor Kasich said, no, we need to move forward. We need to continue enrollment. So he did veto that measure. It's one of those issues that continues to be up in the air. I mean, as we sit here, Congress is talking about taking up the debate, and we don't know what the replacement's going to look like for the Affordable Care Act if they do get that far. So this Medicaid expansion issue, not just for Ohio, but for the country, is really an issue that we're watching closely.
Okay. Another issue that I think people in all different industries are watching closely is the opiate epidemic happening in Ohio. You work a lot in the chamber with workforce development issues, and so that's something that I'm sure you're very familiar with.
Right.
The legislature responded to that issue within the state budget as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the opioid crisis in Ohio is really an issue that both sides, Republicans and Democrats in the legislature, really wanted to take up. We understand, we all see on a daily basis that this is impacting Ohio families, this is impacting our workforce, this is really impacting our future as a state, this crisis. And so the legislature set aside about $170 million in this budget to tackle this crisis, and this is kind of spread across a wide variety of agencies. So you're dealing with mental health programs, you're dealing with child and family services, you're dealing with some prevention and wellness, and then obviously you're dealing with criminal justice. Most people say it's a start, it's a drop in the bucket. We all know this problem is going to require all hands on deck. But I would say this is going to be an issue that we see a lot more from our legislature. We're going to see a lot more as we enter the gubernatorial season, and we see our candidates travel across the state. This is going to be something they address because every community in Ohio is impacted by it, and it crosses economic borders, it crosses demographic borders, and so we're really seeing a concerted effort to really create policies around that and provide funding.
Right, absolutely. And I do want to mention as an aside that there is a business-focused initiative that's going on right now in the Dayton region. It's actually led by Montgomery County Drug, Alcohol, and Mental Health Services, which is also known as ADAMIS. Some of our businesses have actually been involved in that program. They're looking for business input. They're also helping businesses create policies when it comes to drug use in the workplace, or how can they handle that when they're trying to hire as well. They're trying to find people who can pass the drug test. So we're featuring that program in the upcoming issue of Focus magazine, Focus on Business, which is the Chamber's magazine. So watch for that piece, which will be out in August. So just a little aside there if you're interested in that topic. When we're talking about workforce, is there anything else within the workforce development side that came up with the state budget?
Yeah, it wasn't so much around workforce funding, but the governor has made workforce transformation a huge focus. He actually created an office called the Office of Workforce Transformation.
Right, and they were actually on this show.
They were, absolutely.
Yes.
And that office is really kind of directing the activities on behalf of the governor across the state. And more than anything, it's about alignment. It's about understanding the resources that we have currently in our communities. How do we align them? How do we create this collaboration model between government entities and the business community and our K-12 and our higher ed? And I think we have a great model here in Dayton. We work very closely with our Learn to Earn collective impact model. And again, it's another issue where it's all hands on deck. Workforce development is a problem now, is a challenge now, and will be even a greater challenge in the future, because we're talking about careers and jobs that don't even exist yet in our state. We're talking about training for those jobs, not knowing what they are, and how do we prepare for it? How do we get ready? So we're looking at the skills gap. We're looking at how do we model or mold different training experiences? Apprenticeships have come back up as being a really important piece of it. How do we look at transforming career services in our high schools and in our colleges as well? And then a big piece of it is just looking at the data. What are the in-demand jobs for Ohio now, in 10 years from now, in 25 years from now? And so I think Ohio does the big picture piece of it for our state, but the Chamber has been really involved in looking at that data for our region, for our local region. And so I've been involved over the last year creating this website that we're rolling out that's strictly focused on where are the growing industries and what do those jobs look like.
Right.
So we're really excited to share that information with our community. But workforce is tied into everything else we just talked about. It's tied into quality of life for our state and economic growth. So I was excited to see some of those things outlined in the budget, but knowing it's really a lot more focused on policy than it is on hard dollars at this point.
Right. Hopefully we'll get there.
Right.
So it's good to know that we're in line.
Exactly.
Like you said, the Chamber's been working on this for quite a while.
Right.
And you mentioned that website, which will, once it launches, which will be later this summer, we're thinking. We
Yeah,
put a date on it, make you put a date on it. But if you're looking for that information, it will be linked at daytonchamber.org.
Right.
So that will help you get some real good data on where the business community and where the job need is headed
Exactly.
for the Dayton region. So
Exactly.
good information.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
No, I mean, as you mentioned in the opening, this was in some ways a relatively unexciting budget process, but it got exciting there at the end, and the governor came out with some vetoes, and we had to watch it kind of right down to the wire. But ultimately, we're pretty happy with most of what the state has decided to do, particularly around some of the tax reforms and some of the funding for some hot button issues. So
great.
Yeah.
I would say Chamber members are lucky to have you and the rest of the public policy team on their side.
Absolutely.
Because they are really always working for you and always watching any proposals that could come up. So thank you for being with me.
Yeah, thanks, Holly.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget we can keep you up to date every day. We've got new information about the business community in the Dayton region on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook and YouTube. So go out there and give us a like or a follow. We appreciate that. I'm Holly Allen, Director of Marketing and Communications for the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for being with us, and stay tuned for a message from our President and CEO, Phil Parker.
Today's show focused on the state's new biennium budget for 2017 through 2019 and was a discussion about several items that the Chamber feels are important to business, our community, and our citizens. Once again, there was much debate about tax reform, or at least the structure of Ohio taxes. For years, business taxes have been levied through a commercial activity tax, or CAT tax, based on sales volume, and also with retail sales tax. Individuals have also paid both retail sales tax and income taxes to support our state government structure. Elected officials are always debating or tweaking the system, but this year's two-year budget has done little to change much of this. Businesses also continue to pay workers' compensation premiums as well as unemployment compensation assessments, both of which continue to be debated. One of the issues hotly debated this year was Medicaid expansion and if those coverages continue as status quo or expand to other Ohioans. Ohio citizens need to not only be aware of tax rates and rules in Ohio, but like businesses must understand that states which attract new jobs to their communities are usually more successful in environments of lower taxes and improved services. The Chamber continues to weigh in on these issues so that we can have a competitive atmosphere of job creation and a lower cost of living for both residents and businesses. We hope you've enjoyed our program today, and we always seek your input at our Chamber on issues concerning good government and a strong business environment.